Hello, everybody. Welcome to an HFS podcast. I'm Phil Fersht, the CEO Chief Analyst. And today I'm joined by a couple of colleagues in the industry from IBM, of all places, who are going to join with me in a conversation around the importance of native automation in the environment that we're in. And these two folks, Tom Ivory, who's the Global Automation Head for IBM Global Business Services, and Rania Khalaf, who's a Director at the IBM Research Labs, specializing in leading a lot of their initiatives in AI and runtime. So hi, Tom, and hi, Rania. If you could just briefly give us a quick intro.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll start. Yeah, thanks, Phil, for hosting us, and thank you to the HFS audience. I'm glad to be with everyone today. I am the Vice President, Senior Partner for IBM Automation and Global Business Services, and I've got global responsibilities to develop automation, AI-powered automation capabilities, and bring them to all of our services engagements, including on the hybrid cloud application or IT side of the house, as well as our business process, BPO, and business process re-engineering side of the house. So look forward to the discussion today and talk about the new mindset, and how automation can help with growth and all of that at our customer.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. Rania?
So I'm Rania Khalaf. I'm the Director of AI Platforms and Runtimes at IBM Research. I run a global research strategy on artificial intelligence for automation and how to infuse AI into automation to make it better, faster, and safer.
Okay, wonderful. So, let's start with you, Tom. We've heard a lot about different types and flavors of automation in recent years, but something you guys have been talking about lately is extreme automation. Maybe a mindset shift that you're seeing in the market. Could you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by extreme?
Yeah, definitely, Phil. And before I get into defining extreme, I think it is worth visiting the different flavors, as you mentioned, right? I mean, the way that I see it and IBM views the world of automation is this journey we've been on since about 2010. We've been, obviously automating a lot of workloads across corporations for a very long time. But in 2010, that's when, in this last decade, we've seen the automation of workflows through scripting, attended and unattended automation, looking at manual task automation, right? And then around 2017, 2018, entered this new era of intelligent automation, right? This is where we saw an explosion of innovative technologies out there, the maturity of OCR, optical character recognition, natural language processing, analytics engines, robotic process automation. Then we looked at tackling more complex use cases, right? It wasn't just task automation. We started looking at how we can do, more complicated workflows and integrating all of these new intelligent or AI-based automations. And we were well on that journey, but as we all know, 2020 was a year unlike any other, right? And around March of 2020, our IBM leadership was asked by analysts and advisors like you and our client leadership teams, what are going to be the changes that unfold and how are you going to address these unprecedented needs that are going to occur in the market? And so at that time, our leadership adopted this mindset where there are going to be a number of changes. One, we're going to have this hyper acceleration journey to the cloud, which has proven to be true, as everybody knows. Two, we're going to have a rewiring of supply chains because of the disruption and the volatility in the markets and moving goods and services from one point to another. That required, a re-engineering, of supply chain processes. And that's been proven to be true and is a work in progress as we speak. Three, this notion of extreme automation. And so what we meant by that is that it was going to be pervasive and native and a new burning platform, an urgent need for us to pivot to automating, like I said earlier in my intro, everywhere and anywhere we possibly can automate. And what we mean by that is a couple of things. One, it's across business and IT. So it's, on the full stack of the enterprise, from your hybrid cloud infrastructure through your applications, through your data, your business processes, with the ultimate goal to transform all of the workflows on top of that. That could be workflows in finance, workflows in supply chain, workflows in procurement, workflows in IT, but that's the end game. And there are four dimensions, to all of that as we see. There's process, talent, technology, and data, right? And in all four of those dimensions, there is a next generation of where automation can be applied. In process, as I mentioned, it used to be task automation. Now we're moving to automating complex workflows. And talent, it's a hybrid environment between digital workers and automated solutions and a human workforce and the change management that's responsible for that, right? And the technology, it's this coalescence, this convergence of AI powered automation with analytics, data, and digital assistants all coming together to be integrated. And then with the data, it's using AI to serve as a microscope to see where you can automate using technologies like process mining, process intelligence based technologies, and then the ongoing optimization over time. So it's quite a shift in a mindset that we're seeing in the market to go to this native extreme automation.
Yeah. I mean, the toolbox emerging that we're seeing a lot of enterprises adopting. But what do you think is happening now that might be different from before we went through a cataclysmic change to ourselves? Do you see something different emerging with the clients that you talk to?
Yeah, I do. A few things. I would say we've been talking about scale for a while, even before the pandemic. But I see the need for scale to an even greater extent now, right? I mean, especially pivoting to a virtual digital world, there needs to be a mechanism for governance and streamlining collaboration and transparency for automation initiatives in a digital format. What we used to do in workshops, in conference rooms, and sticky notes, and design thinking, we had to pivot very rapidly to do that in a virtual environment. So we spent a good portion of the mid part of 2020 taking all of our governance frameworks, our CEOE models, and making them all virtual and digital. And so now that's been, rolled out, and clients now can scale, in this virtual world. I'll say too, since there's been a hyper acceleration to the cloud, we've seen much more of a focus and emphasis now on automating in a hybrid cloud environment. I think the emphasis prior to the pandemic was very business process focused, automate my finance and accounting tasks and processes, my procurement and HR, and then maybe focus on some industry processes. But over the last 3-4 months, the shift and emphasis to IT workflows in a hybrid cloud environment has soared. It has gone exponential, and I see that trend continuing, because when you have a heterogeneous environment with all of these different public clouds and on-prem infrastructure environments, as well as moving to SaaS-based applications like the Salesforces, Workdays, and ServiceNows, this heterogeneous environment, creates more complexity. And a solution and an answer to that, requires automation, which is another form of integration, essentially.
Yeah. As there's a lot more cloud activity going on, I mean, one thing I'm hearing a lot of is there's so much more standardization, security protocols, programming, etc., that you've almost got the CIO community, and maybe even a level down from the CIO, getting much more into understanding business context than they've ever had. Because this is more about applying a scalable, agile infrastructure and capability to the business needs of the business side. And on the flip side, we've got the non-IT executives having to redesign process to operate effectively in this environment, and they need to understand the options that they have. And I'm seeing a real coming together of technology and business that we haven't seen in decades. Is that something you're seeing consistent at IBM, with particularly some of your traditional clients?
We are, yeah. And I can use some very specific examples in terms of where in our business, with our SAP business as an example, as they shift to the cloud, and embrace S/4HANA, there's a big emphasis on incorporating business processes and workflows and business KPIs, on top of the IT shift to the cloud. So this combined effort of overlaying business KPIs and workflows with traditional IT or application modernization is a big conversation theme right now with our customers. We don't see on a daily basis just IT initiatives that don't involve, some sort of business scope to them, right? There's a transformation aspect with them now where they want to bring innovation to, like I was saying before, their supply chain organization with the burning need, to rewire their supply chain processes and operations. So there is more of a combination between IT and business than we've seen in the past. And automation, I feel, is a driving engine to bring that together.
Fantastic, yeah. And I think we'll talk to Rania very shortly about some of the innovations that she's been working on. But I think one of the things I did want to hear a bit more about, Tom, is this fairly rapid shift in narrative that we've had in recent months from, you need an API for this, you need RPA for that, to a much more strategic mindset, which is, what data do we need? That's the strategy. The automation piece isn't really a strategy. It's the ability to redesign processes in the cloud, because you can't do it if you haven't automated them. And then once you're running them in the cloud, you can then run AI off them to be far smarter about how you get predictive data, how you can look forward, how you can be more self-remediating, and how you can orchestrate more effectively. I feel that conversation has moved rapidly, but then I may be talking to an audience that is biased in that direction. Do you feel the conversation has shifted heavily and maybe some of the hype of the past has really dissipated?
Yeah, no, I think the shift to data is a massive one right now, right? And the things that come to mind, and it will be when we bring Ronnie into the conversation. I mean, this is an interesting link between the services, software, and research arms of IBM in order for us to drive, AI-powered automation and business outcomes to our clients, because the IBM Research team is an incredible source of innovation for us that we've relied upon. And one example of that is our process discovery accelerator tool, right? There are a lot of tools out of the market for you to do process intelligence, but this was a phenomenal way for us to equip our consultants with something to be ready as they go out to the field and work with our clients on mining and looking at clickstream data, log files, the desktop procedures, and quickly analyze what would make a good process for automation. Rather than wasting a lot of time and effort, we can get right down to it and say, okay, we've isolated, these 50 processes that are bogging you down and really manual. Let's get to it. That data is incredibly important for us to be able to move quickly with our clients because they want to go fast, right? And the second thing I'd say, this corpus of data that we're leveraging, through initiatives like AI Ops, right? We made an announcement in the last couple of months with Watson AI Ops. And so my services team is using this now as an integral solution for us to take data, whether that be from tools like Slack or Box, and rather than waiting for a manual chronological event coming from a ticketing system to trigger an action that you need to take, it's leveraging data for you to rapidly, autonomously automate these processes. So that way you can keep systems up. They're preventing outages or solving, cybersecurity issues right now. And that's really important as you move to the cloud, and you adopt a hybrid cloud environment. So the data, is a secret sauce that we're providing in terms of, how we're building out our automation solutions.
Thank you. That's excellent, Tom. So Rania, it'd be great to hear a bit more about your research agenda and a little bit about how that's evolving. How does that work with the client base at IBM and maybe the client base that IBM's looking to evolve to in the future?
So first, I just wanted to say a few words about IBM Research for those that aren't really familiar with it. So it's a 75-year-old organization with about 3,000 researchers around the globe in multiple labs. And, we have several Nobel Award winners and Turing Award winners and so on for creating some of the seminal technology, not only in computing, but also in physics, semiconductors, and so on. So it's really a wonderful place. My team itself is a mix of engineers, research scientists, and designers that are really focusing on how to make AI faster, more efficient, and safer. And really how you can use it, not only looking at the models themselves, but in how you can do that at the application level, and with a big focus on automation and both business and IT processes. As Tom mentioned, we're seeing a lot of focus on connecting the IT and business layers together and looking at IT processes also from a KPI and outcomes data-driven lens. So here, We have a focus in our research to look at shifts that we are seeing in automation to make them more data-driven and goal-oriented. By that, we mean that we want to look at what people are trying to accomplish and see how much of the behavior that you want can be created for you or adapted based on what the users are trying to do, and lower how much work it is, how much development costs and so on is needed in order to create these automation application and adapt them. Like we're seeing now, for example, with COVID, a lot of business operations had to shift, and replacing your business processes, modifying them is very time consuming and brittle. So we really look at how we can add some flexibility based on what you want your outcomes to be, and have the systems underneath be more adaptive and more responsive based on how they combine the pieces together. So there we really look at this space in three lenses. First, we look at the process knowledge for AI. So how do I understand the world? And here we have a lot of focus on extracting knowledge from documents. So for example, a lot of the work on content extraction from documents has been on consumer data, but what we see in enterprise is the type of data looks different. So some of these big AI models, they don't do so well. They're trained on cats and dogs and things like this. But what we have is pictures of ID cards, sensitive data, invoices, and so on. So we are doing some very exciting work around improving this kind of knowledge extraction from this data that may have pictures in the background, holograms, really focused to the business needs where you need some understanding of the domain. And once you do that, now you have an understanding of what's in your documents. We look at how can I look at the historical data and the live data to both find automation opportunities, improve my outcomes, redesign my processes. This goes back to some of the work Tom mentioned around mining and discovery. But then once you've done that, you can also use that live at runtime for monitoring purposes. So here we also look at techniques for KPI drift, for decision recommendation, and giving you kind of real-time insight to improve the actions that you can take. So once we've extracted the knowledge that we need out of the documents, we're able to monitor and improve the processes that are going on. We then really look at the hyperautomation space and these hybrid workforces. So what we see is that there's a plethora of now, bots, RPAs, different automation services that can do different pieces of your business process. Creating end-to-end application with those by hand today with scripts and code is brittle and hard-coded. And we see that as people want to interact more dynamically with the systems, have their employees work with them, we are really looking at how to make that a lot more flexible and dynamic so that you can go to a more hybrid workforce. And here our focus specifically has been on, if you think of having the different automation pieces as services or APIs, we give a little bit of more information about them to be able to compose them as much as possible also on the fly, so we can decide the sequence of actions to take based on what the user is doing with the system, or based on the context that is there. And we have a nice integration for that with natural language and conversational systems. So here we see this as an evolution of business processes from workflow-based to case management, which was a lot more people-centric, knowledge worker-based, and event-centric, to something that's a lot more dynamic, real-time, and responsive to what the humans are doing with the systems to kick off the right automations at the right time.
Right. So there's been a lot of talk around, you sort of mentioned digital assistants, and I know Watson's developed some very interesting and impressive solutions in this space. They're not talked about as much in the commercial markets as of yet. We hear them from bits and pieces. Really, the focus has been a little bit more on the back office, to be honest. But they have become a lot more prevalent, obviously, in this market than the need for real, what we call human augmentation in the workplace. How do you see that evolving? I know you're at the cutting edge of this. How advanced is some of the technology here, and what is the gap between maybe what companies have today and their ability to adopt these?
Mm-hmm. So we see quite a few trends in the assistance space. And there are areas that are really focused on these dialogue systems that are focused on different domains. There, maybe a lot of the value is in the knowledge they have about that particular domain. And then there's the more AI-centric solutions that are really very focused on a more natural human interaction, better dialogue, better natural language interactions to extract information from different documents to better customer service. We also see a trend now, for example, in the RPA vendors to add a little bit of dialogue on top of in front of their RPAs, but we see that as being quite brittle still, but it does give you a bit of a layer of human interaction. So we see this at different avenues, right? The more AI-centric folks are really driving with a big focus on natural language interaction, more dynamic behavior, and the folks coming like from more the business process side, adding a little bit of the dialogue capability, even very simplistic ways, just to give you a way in. And I think these things are going to start intersecting each other. We focus a lot in our research work. We work very closely with the Watson Assistant team and the automation team, because what we really see as quite exciting is connecting these types of assistants, multiple of them, to your workforce more dynamically, and unlocking the value that is in your automation services. So now you can, approve a travel request or process a loan approval or check on, inquire about the state of your process, how it's going. We are developing some capability around natural language query. So we can go from a natural language sentence to a query on structured data, for example. And I really think this kind of connect between the, single user, single agent, like a lot of the dialogue systems are going after, to something that is really helping you automate and orchestrate your automation services, the interaction of your workers with your systems, and so on, where then these assistants become like a piece of the puzzle to help you solve your end-to-end business goals.
Right. And you talk a bit about flexibility of workflow and how interactive these are. I think that's a very key point. We look at obviously the stack that companies are developing that can be more nimble. It's easier to make changes on the fly. It's easier to do that. But I also see this as a huge challenge. So when you start to look at what some enterprises are doing and the workflow is not flexible enough, I mean, how do you break that down more and get them into a more flexible mindset where they can start to design and deliver on the fly?
I think this is also a great point of how we work with teams, for example, in our services arm like Tom's, where we do garages and different workshops with clients, led by the services teams. We are bringing more the algorithmic side of things and helping figure out how you do the APIs, what kind of metadata we would need for the algorithms to work. We also, I agree with you completely. It's definitely a mindset. I think the mindset's really important, right? One example was when DevOps came around and people were saying, just because you use GitHub and Jenkins doesn't mean you're not still doing waterfall, right?
Yeah.
Not enough to use the tools. You have to think differently, work differently. It's process and technology. And that's where this partnership with services is so great, because it allows us to work with our clients, improve and develop the algorithms together. And then, either they stay as services assets or we work with our software counterparts to promote those up into the product. So they become part and parcel of the IBM software offering. So that's how we see this continuum, this pipeline of innovation from the labs where we are sitting, collaborating with teams in services like Tom's, and back to the software products that IBM has to offer. And sometimes we are research, so we are in a privileged position of being allowed to fail. So we can try different things, we can experiment and explore, and it's not always going to work, but that allows us to be a lot more bold and daring and try things that we can explore and experiment with and see how that does and where we can get measurable improvements in the market.
Yeah, I mean, we had a conversation recently with Ed Lynch, who's in your software group, right, who was highlighting one of the big barriers they were finding particularly in the current environment, is this perception of AI being a little spooky. It's being kind of, people feel uncomfortable more than ever sharing data with various types of applications and services. Is that exacerbating? Is that getting worse, or do you feel that people are getting smarter about how they operate? And what's your kind of approach here in general?
Yeah, so I'll say a bit from the research side, and maybe Tom can chime in as well for the rest of the company. Mm-hmm. I think one interesting point is I gave a guest lecture at MIT Sloan, like right after the big Facebook breach. And I was explaining how IBM at its culture, we are very careful with people's data and our customers' data and so on. So for us, the AI researchers, in a sense, it was a little frustrating because people were using all these public data sets to do all this research, but a lot of them had constraints. So our lawyers were very adamant that, we had to really clear serious hurdles before we could do anything with anyone's data. And I think that permeates into the whole approach. However, without data in AI, you're a bit stuck in the mud. So I think this is where in IBM we really work very hard to do this balance of how do we use data responsibly. We have a lot of processes in place and things like this. Also, we have a very large trusted AI research effort that is in research partnered with the Watson Group. So half of my team nearly works in that space. And this is about how we can build trust into the core of our AI platform. So when the data is acquired and analyzed, we can do bias checking, we can do remediation. When the model is built, even when it's running, we monitor it and we can see if it's even at runtime, maybe misbehaving or starting to violate some of these trust constraints around bias, security, and so on. So that is one way, that IBM is really looking to build trust into the core of its platforms and allow reporting and checks and balances in place. And finally, just to mention, I think one approach that I like in what we're doing on the orchestration domain to add more flexibility is what we were seeing, a lot of the time when you needed that flexibility, people leave the systems and go into email, Excel, blah, blah. And then it's the Wild West. So just because it's not in your monitored process doesn't mean it's not being done willy-nilly, right? So I think doing it through a system that enables the flexibility lets you still audit and check and do compliance and things like that, which I think is quite valuable in enterprise setting where compliance is important.
Yeah, it's increasingly so. It's increasingly so.
Yeah, and I could add to that, Phil, from a services perspective with regards to trust, I think Rania, picked up on a big theme that I'm consistently seeing now, trust in automation. In fact, I delivered a webinar to one of the police forces in the UK recently, where they were talking about trust, in terms of embracing AI-powered automation, and how that would affect the data within, their police force. And another example in the US is a client, the Department of Veterans Affairs, right? And for those not in the US, not familiar with this government agency, this is for all of our military veterans who, receive benefits for life or insurance, benefits, employment types of benefits. They had a horrific customer service operation for years. And a couple of years ago, they embarked on a transformation to really help their benefits. It was a patriotic, journey that they went down to say, look, we got to serve these veterans better. They deserve better. And so they looked to IBM. And I think, IBM's been known for a long time for this trust factor with clients. We're, relied upon by government agencies around the world, by financial institutions to run mission critical processes, right? And so these new emerging areas like automation and AI, blockchain, we need to make sure that we adhere to the expectations that our customers have for IBM, and the brand that we have. And when it comes to, an opportunity like at the Veterans Affairs Administration, we go in with a blank canvas, right? We don't come in there with all these tools and say, okay, we've got these bells and whistles and these technologies. We sit down with them and say, what do you want to achieve? What are your goals and how do you want to measure the transformation of your customer experience with these veterans, and therefore map out, the workflow and how these processes will be transformed and so on. And then we bring in, the technology. And in this situation, we have a wide variety, of technologies that we've brought in. It's very public that we use Blue Prism for robotic process automation there, but then we also use IBM software, for the process discovery accelerator, for BPM and case management. We have a lot of other third-party tools as well. So our job as the services arm, is to put the pieces of the puzzle together, like Rania said, right? And we have, I think, really this good source of innovation, like I said before, with IBM Research to bring these leading edge capabilities that these labs around the world, under Rania's direction are providing technology capabilities that we can't find elsewhere right now. So we can bring some different innovative ways, to shape the outcomes for our customers like we did at the VA.
We're talking about native automation, extreme automation, whatever we want to call it, automation. Ultimately, it is a mindset, and it's getting people to think a little bit more about moving things into the cloud. You have to think much more about workflows, much more about driving those workflows to drive the outcomes you need to get to. But ultimately, it's a mindset shift, and I think that's been the biggest challenge of our industry in the last 2 or 3 decades, has been getting over that and thinking differently. Do you feel that's generally happening, or it's still a lot of talk and maybe not a lot of action, or do you think there's generally been a shift in that direction in the last maybe year as we've experienced what we've gone through?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a mindset. I think, so when you came out with your, one office new technology platform and used the word native, that definitely struck a chord with me and my team who have been constructing this new framework around extreme automation, right? I think there's a lot of, similarities. There's a common goal there to bring automation and AI-powered automation pervasively, to all corners of our clients' organization, right? So that mindset I see now. I'll tell you, I've been immersed in this automation world for a while now, and over and over again, I saw the focus just on task automation and using RPA and not stretching to the limits of what automation capabilities were out there in the market. But now I see our clients really adopting this new mindset of automating, anywhere they can. And they're looking at the success that they've had with some of the basic process automation and saying, okay, now we want to use these algorithmic AI capabilities. Now we want to apply machine learning. And so the mindset, I think, is thinking bigger, right? Thinking more confidently, but also, pushing themselves to be less conservative, maybe, to say, okay, if there's any time to do anything and really experiment and, weave this into our natural corporate strategy, this is the time to do it. We're making leaps of faith to push all of our applications and infrastructure to the cloud. We should attempt to, look at, how we could use automation everywhere we can as well. But I'll also say they have to, right? And we did a great report together, HFS and IBM several months ago, the have to haves, right? And so the have to haves in this report, and I encourage everyone, to read this, really boils down to one thing. With the volatility and the disruption that our clients are all facing right now, they don't have the time and the luxury with limited resources, limited people, limited talent, to try to do this all analog and manually. I mean, you have to use automation in order to keep up and survive right now. There's just too many overwhelming things on the agenda right now. And automation is an answer for you to create more bandwidth for your organization. You don't have time to solve every IT incident with a human being and, in a manual way. You have to start using automation to do this in order for you to stay afloat, in this new world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. That's for sure. Let's look out a bit further as we wind up this conversation, and maybe Rania, you want to start. As you look at this whole automation evolution over maybe the next 3-4 years, what are your predictions? What do you think is going to truly happen that in these next 3 or 4 years that's going to be notable?
It's going to be a lot more, hopefully, data-driven. we're going to see a lot of focus on lowering the cost of development and enabling more of the line of business to get the automation created and done and up and running. I see also a lot of infusion of artificial intelligence techniques, both canned ones like APIs, such as knowledge extraction from images and things like this, existing natural language models, as well as some intelligence into how the logic is executed and created.
Great. Tom, any predictions from your standpoint for enterprise automation?
Yeah, I have a lot, but there's one that I really want to emphasize for this conversation is a massive and rapid talent reskilling in the industry, right? I think we're going to see over the next 12 months an evolution in the people that work for consulting firms, software companies, client organizations, make a transformation, make a change that we haven't seen in decades, right? I mean, hybrid cloud skills, AI skills, automation skills, blockchain skills, supply chain transformation skills. This is going to be, a major movement, and we're going to look back, over this time from 2020 to say, 2023, 2024, as the time of change, the time, of the new skills for the next, 20, 30 years.
Absolutely. I think this digital fluency, as we call it, is really dominant. And I've had a lot of conversations with people, especially recently, around this realization that we all work differently now. That we all miss each other. We talk to, our business has survived very well off the relationships we had moving into COVID, and at some point you can't survive on those forever. You have to start building new ones and accepting the environment you're in. So people you may have seen 10 times a year, it's now twice a year or 3 times a year. So interactions are different. The way that we approach our job has to be different, and we have to accept things that we may not like anymore. I mean, people in sales complain that procurement is much more dominant now because of the automation pieces and the way things are. I'm like, well, that means you need to spend more time with procurement people then, doesn't it? And people in development now, they judge much more on did it work or did it not work. So this judgment on outcomes and bigger things is really important. And myself running a small to medium business I look much more at bigger things now than small things. Maybe in the past I used to get obsessed with minutia. Now I'm much more looking at, well, are they doing the main things right? Are the main things right? And if you keep your mindset on those smaller number of bigger metrics and bigger issues, that seems to be where things are shifting, and you think less about the way of the past. So I definitely think there's a big mindset shift, and as we evolve back to a more normalistic environment, people are getting vaccinated and different rates and speeds, but by the end of this year, we'll probably all be, touch wood, safe and operating in a much more normal capacity. Now, I think we'll never forget the pandemic era we've just come through. It really has been the game changer that we never knew was going to happen, and happened, and a coming together of how we work together, talk and exchange information, and think about the future. So I've really enjoyed this conversation, folks, Tom and Rania, and I look forward to sharing this with everybody. I'll dig out the report we put together a few months ago as well, and we'll also tie that to this, so we'll give that out too. And look forward to catching up again soon. Rania, it's great to hear more about the labs at IBM, and seeing you guys over the years. It's been such a feature of the firm to see some of the work you're doing, and it'd be really exciting to keep in touch as things continue to evolve. So wonderful experience hearing from you all, and look forward to the next one.
Sure. Thank you for having us. It was really great.
Thank you. This has been great discussion.